So earlier I was hoping to ask if everyone would be in agreement to get an update from the analysts on the state of the previous study on COVID-19. As you recall, the terms of the instructions from the House motion number S is that we can bring that information, the witness testimony and documentation into this study and carry forward. I know that the analysts put a lot of work into doing a report. I think they're fairly well along on the report, and I'm wanting to know, wondering if the committee is in favor of hearing about the status of that report and whether we want to carry on with it. So anyways, is there any disagreement with hearing from the analysts at this point?
Do you mean, just a point of clarification, Chair, do you mean like a full meeting or just to have a written update?
I'm just right now, a conversation with the analyst so they can tell us where they are on that study, and if it's something we want to carry on with, or whether we want to, what do we want to do with that data? So.
Just on that point, Chair, I'm just concerned that because right now we only have one meeting scheduled a week, that I would prefer that come in writing for our consideration first.
Okay, well then, so there is no unanimous consent to do that. So I think it's up to the committee to carry on. So we call this meeting to consider witnesses and to make plans for going forward with this study. Let me just check my participants panel here. I have Ms. Rempel, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just because I know that this meeting is likely going to get interrupted by votes today, and there's quite a bit of work for us to do as a committee, this is what I would suggest on how we should move forward. We've got the matter of the COVID study, as well as the matter of the PMPRB study, and I would suggest just to move forward that perhaps we have an informal offline conversation with yourself, whoever the quarterback is on the Liberal side, myself, and perhaps my colleagues that are the vice chairs from the NDP and the Bloc, and we just discuss way forward and then have another meeting to do this. I know my colleague Mr. Davies has a suggestion on how we proceed with the COVID study for selection of topics and witnesses, but I'm wondering if everybody's amenable to that. Then we could come back and have a very quick procedural meeting to formally put that into action. I think that there's general willingness to entertain topics collegially, but I'm thinking that might be the best way forward so that we can give the clerk some instructions.
I guess one of the points of doing this in a meeting is that we have access to House resources for interpretation, so that all members have the ability to communicate properly. Anyway, I will go now to Mr. Davies. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think that's a good suggestion from Michelle Rempel Garner. What I was going to suggest we could think about was we do have the motion from the House that's been directed to the committee, and so what we need to do is come up with I think an efficient and fair way moving forward. And what I was going to propose for all of my colleagues to think about is a process like this, that each party submit, say, 4 issues that they would like the committee to study within the purview of the motion coming before the committee on COVID-19, and that each party rank their 4 issues. What we can then do is take each issue and deal with them in rotation. So whether that's Conservative, Liberal, Bloc, NDP, or Liberal, Conservative, Bloc, NDP. And then what the committee will just have to at that point is assign the number of meetings to each of those particular issues. And then we can, of course, have our witness selection, which I think is prescribed by the motion. The motion does speak to each party having 1 witness per 1 hour meeting and 2 witnesses per 2-hour meeting. So it's basically an equal submission of witnesses on the issues. Perhaps we could start. I think each party probably knows what one issue they would like to start with. So perhaps by this Friday, we could all submit we could submit our first issue that we'd like to have studied by COVID on COVID. And then perhaps by the middle of next week, we could follow up with the next 3 issues that are ranked in order. I also think that we should have some loose parameters around the number of meetings, perhaps a minimum of 1 meeting per issue. I think some of the issues maybe could be handled in 1 meeting, and some will take longer. I would say it should be between 1 and 4 meetings per issue, and then the committee, of course, can have the ability to extend that as they see fit. And that way, I think we can get to work on the study quite quickly. I'm happy to sit down in the subcommittee context as well. I am a bit concerned about translation, but because I don't really understand why we can't have translation at our subcommittee meetings. The subcommittee is part of this committee, and it has to be able to function, and it has to be able to function with interpretation. I also just wanted to touch on the issue, if I could, about the PMPRB study, because I think there's confusion about this. The motion that we passed last week said that we would ask for stakeholders and witnesses to be invited to provide submissions to the committee by November 6th. And then once we got those submissions, we were then going to decide as a committee who we were going to invite as witnesses. The way that the clerk is dealing with our offices is that we have to have our own witnesses in by this week, which is not what we considered, or not what the motion said, and not what we discussed last week, because we want to see the written submissions first before we decide. And I'm mindful of Mr. Terrio's very eloquent submissions that we want to get witnesses before this committee as soon as possible. But I don't want to be submitting witnesses on Wednesday for the PMPRB study before I've seen what the submissions are from the Canadian public. So I think we need to clarify that latter point. If I have it wrong, then I do, but I have had a chance to review my understanding with some of my colleagues, and that's the same understanding that they had. So I think we have to clarify that. But I don't know if we feel comfortable sort of adopting a general way forward on the COVID study at this meeting, or if we'd be better served by following Ms. Rempel-Garner's suggestion that we refer this matter to the subcommittee for more detailed discussions and then come back to the committee. Where I'll conclude is if we do that latter process, then we are going to slow down because whatever the subcommittee decides, we'll have to come back to this committee for discussion and endorsement at any rate. So I personally feel, I've had discussions with some of my colleagues, and I think from each party, and I think there's probably general consensus that we just get to work by submitting our first issue, getting them in order, and that seems fair. It's equal. It allows every party to put forward an issue and allows us to get to work on the House motion as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. I should clarify that my understanding of Ms. Rempel's motion was, or not motion, her suggestion was for an informal meeting, which is not a subcommittee meeting. A subcommittee meeting requires the resources of the House. It is a formal meeting, and it will also require the whips to agree on timing as well. So I'll go now to Mr. Van Bynen, please.
Could I just have a quick point of order for a second, Mr. Chair? Sorry.
Point of order, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Sorry about this. Dawn had said that we would choose the topics from what was in the motion that was passed in the House. However, the motion that was passed in the House was including but not limited to. So I just want to make sure that we get the clarity there that other topics can be put forward by all the parties, not just what was in the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. We go now to Mr. Van Bynen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think what's being proposed is a reasonable approach. And what we really do want to do is get some traction and get started on some studies. My question to you is, I'm still not certain as to what was intended with respect to hearing what was heard in the first portion of the HESA meeting for this session. So was the intent or the request for written comments, was that a summary of what was learned and a summary of where we are with the report, or was the intent to bring forward a draft for discussion in terms of what was learned in the first part of the session? Just wanted to clarify that.
That's a suggestion by Ms. Rempel. Ms. Rempel, did you want to clarify?
With regard to, sorry, Chair, the reporting process, or with the clerks, or with the with how to proceed?
I had asked if we were okay with having the analysts step in just at the moment and give us a verbal update on the status of the previous study. You had suggested you'd rather have that in writing.
Well,
Mr. Van Bynen is asking exactly what you want in writing, as I understand it.
yeah, I wouldn't want to spend, like, I'm not sure what you're saying by an update. I wouldn't want to spend a whole meeting on that, because I think that we have a lot of work to do and not a lot of resources to do it. So what I was suggesting as an alternative was that the clerks provide us with a written report, and that we can spend more time on that if members feel like we need it. If it's a 50-second update right now, that's fine. If it's something that's longer, where we want to do question rounds, I would prefer to get it as something I could read.
Thank you. Mr. Van Bynen, does that answer your question?
Well, to your intent, Mr. Chair, if you intended a very brief verbal update, and that will help us decide how we would go forward with the previous report. I think we've invested a ton of time and a lot of resources in the first sitting, and I think that can help us put together a framework on how we should be going ahead. And so I think dealing with or looking at the draft report from the previous sitting would be very helpful for us. So if we can get a brief summary about what's entailed in that, then we can decide as to whether or not we should go forward to receive the draft report and give consideration to the draft report.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bynen. That was indeed my intent. Mr. Fisher, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Dawn for that suggestion. I think that is actually a good way to go. I wonder whether we could maybe send our lists in prior to Friday. I do see some value in us getting to work. The sooner we provide our lists, perhaps the clerk can put the list together and see which one we're going to go in which order, and then get started. And if we get our lists in tomorrow or Wednesday instead of Friday, then maybe we get a chance to start talking about getting witnesses in. Also, with regards to an informal meeting, I think the informal meeting then kind of leaves Mr. Terrio out, because we wouldn't have the ability to have interpretation. I think we can work as a committee.
Mr. Chair, I'm sure that we can find interpretation.
Excuse me, let's not interrupt Mr. Fisher.
Anyway, I was just going to say, I think that Don's onto something there. I think it does give us the ability, and all I've been seeking from the start is some fairness here. And I think that what he's put out there is pretty much fair for every party. So, without continuing to chat about this forever, why don't we find a way forward that seems fair for everybody and get on with this? If we've got 2 topics or 3 topics or 4 topics, like Don suggested, let's get them submitted to the clerk. Let's get on with this, and then start having a conversation about who our witnesses are going to be, so that we can, start doing some work. Thanks.
Ms. Rempel, Garner, did you wish to make a point?
I would just say there's no intention on excluding anybody with any language. I'm sure any form of meeting we can ensure that we can have interpretation available. I'm just looking for a solution on a way forward, given that House of Commons is telling our committees that we don't have the IT resources to have more than 1 or 2 meetings in a week. So I'm looking for ways to move forward on behalf of the Canadian people, showing that we have resiliency and innovation in having the ability to meet beyond our scheduled meeting times. And I'm sure that interpretation is possible.
I'll just to add a point of clarification, we went through this process at some length in the spring, where we had to do informal meetings with, and in order to arrange translation, we actually were only able to get consecutive translation, which basically doubles the length of the meetings and makes it really, really awkward to get anything done. So that's why, in order to get use of House resources, that's why, a subcommittee meeting or a regular meeting of the committee was proposed. We'll go now to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, go ahead, please.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say to MP Don Davies, what he's put forward is would get right to the heart of the matter. My dearly departed dad, who was in charge of mine rescue for years here in Cape Breton, would say, pitter patter, let's get at it. And I think that this motion's fair, it's balanced, and I really do support it. I mean, look, whether what party you're part of, it's time now to get to work, and I think that this does that as well. And again, I think that details and facts matter. So I don't know, being new to this, I don't know what the eligibility or the ability rather to get translation services to an informal or formal is. I will defer to the clerk on that, but we need to make sure that we have access to it, and as Ms. Rempel said, to make sure that everybody is included. And I would like to put that on the table as well. So, just to sum up, I would love to be able to leave this meeting with some wind on our backs with respect to Don Davies' motion, and let's get to it. Canadians are depending on us.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, just quickly, I'm not certain whether Mr. Davies actually moved a motion. I would support something similar to what he moved if he's willing to actually move a motion, but I don't actually know whether he did put a suggestion on the table or an actual motion.
Point of clarification on my part, maybe I'm just too eager to get going. So I'll retract that last statement.
Mr. Chair, for the indulgence of my colleagues, I'm happy to move that if that helps move the conversation forward.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. We'll go to Mr. Theriault at this point. Mr. Theriault, you have the floor.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'll start with what was said at the end by Mr. Davies regarding the PMPRBs and the study. We agreed that November 6th was the deadline for two things: the intent to appear at the hearing from the witnesses with a brief or a document which would help us make good decisions. But I'd like to remind our colleagues that this motion was voted on in the committee was because throughout this process, some people have felt set aside in terms of the ability to appear before the committee. So I wouldn't want to see a narrow or exclusive interpretation of who's going to be on the witness list. I don't think we should put a limitation to who can appear on that list. Again, of course, we'll have to see who will have stated by November 6th that they wish to appear with a supporting document, first of all. Second of all, in terms of informal meetings, if there is no interpretation, simultaneous interpretation, you are forgetting about me. It's clear that we can work together at subcommittee. We can have as many as we need per week, but we need to work in a formal way. Committees, subcommittees, that's it. Informal meetings, not interested, especially if it's through consecutive interpretation. I want that to be clear. No way. Now, it's time for us to start our work. However, one of the reasons why I supported this motion was that all of the work that has been done in the past was not set aside through this motion. When we want to have more information regarding a certain topic, it's usually necessary to get a summary of what was done. And it appears that the analysts worked very hard on this. I would have wanted to receive this document or this information and to get a short presentation on it. If we want to move forward, we need to see what was done in the past to be reminded of some of the facts. I would have been in favor of that. We are taking a lot of time trying to find a method, but we're currently wasting time, a lot of time. Perhaps we should agree to move a little bit faster in our methodology. All right? Those are my comments regarding this morning. I do believe that our voters and the people in our riding deserve to see what's happening, but we need to move forward at some point.
Merci, Monsieur Thériault.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thériault.
Colleagues, the bells are ringing. We require unanimous consent to proceed any further. I suggest we could go for, say, another 5 minutes. Would there be unanimous consent to do that?
Chair, I'm just concerned because some of my colleagues are on rural Wi-Fi and they need a little bit longer to make sure that they're logged in appropriately. And we've had incidences where people have not been able to log in and had a vote. So
no unanimous consent. Okay. Very well.
Can we just get to the point where we get the motion on the floor and then just agree right quickly with moving in that direction so that we can get our lists submitted by end of day tomorrow?
We don't
sorry,
have
Mr.
unanimous
Chair.
consent to carry on. So the votes will take quite some time. I suspect that there will be no time after the votes to carry on the meeting. So I propose that we should adjourn at this time. That being said, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Another day.